All right, let's just jump right in. We're talking about one of the most influential thinkers in all of Western history, St. Augustine. He's this absolute giant in theology, yeah? But he's maybe even more famous for how raw and honest he was about his own personal struggles. And today, we're going straight to the heart of that battle. Now, I know that's a provocative question. We're taking a guy who lived 1,600 years ago, and we're looking at him through this really modern lens. But the way he talks about his own battles, using words like slavery and captivity, it sounds shockingly familiar, doesn't it? So yeah, let's go there. But to really get to the bottom of this, we can't just look at his theology in some kind of vacuum. We have to understand the deeply human story that fueled all of it. See, Augustine's ideas about sin and grace, they weren't just abstract theories. They were forged in the fire of his own life, especially his relationships. And that story really kicks off with a massive heartbreak. I mean, for 15 years, Augustine was in a committed relationship with a woman he truly loved. She was the mother of his son. But as he started climbing the social ladder, his mother arranged let's say, a more strategic marriage for him. The catch? He had to break up with his partner first. And listen to this. These are Augustine's own words. This is not some cold, detached analysis. This is a man describing pure agony. He says his heart was racked and wounded and bleeding. You can just feel the devastation in that quote. This was a breakup that absolutely scarred him for life. So you have to wonder, right? If this relationship was so central to his life, why does he never tell us her name? Well, scholars point to a few things. First, his book, The Confessions, is all about his spiritual journey. He's the one putting himself on trial here. Second, he was almost certainly trying to protect her dignity and our privacy. And finally, it was actually pretty common for writers back then to keep people anonymous. It made the moral lesson of the story feel more universal, like it could apply to anyone. But what happened after the split? Wow. Their reactions could not have been more different. She goes back to Africa and takes a vow to never be with another man, a move that Augustine himself said he deeply admired. And what does he do? He admits it himself, calling himself an unhappy one, who could not imitate a woman. He goes out and immediately finds another mistress because he couldn't stand to wait for his new, younger fiancée to come of age. And this experience, right here, this is the absolute key to unlocking his biggest ideas. This feeling of being completely powerless over his own desires, it became the very bedrock for his theology of lust. Now, it's so important we get this right. When Augustine talks about lust, or concupiscentia in Latin, he means something way bigger than we usually mean today. It's not just about sex. For him, it's any disordered desire. A lust for power, a lust for money, a lust for approval, anything that puts the stuff of this world before God. He saw this as a fundamental brokenness in all of us, a direct result of original sin. He basically saw life as this constant internal war. Just look at this quote. He doesn't describe some simple mistake you can just decide to stop making. He says, I see a struggle, I do not see a victory, it is a contest. For him, this wasn't a skirmish, it was a battle raging inside every single person. So where did this internal war even come from? Well, Augustine's logic was this. Because humanity first disobeyed God's will in the Garden of Eden, our own bodies now disobey our will. This disturbance, as he called it, especially the way sexual desire can seem to have a mind of its own, separate from our reason, was a direct, humbling reminder of that original fall from grace. Okay, so this leads to the central problem in Augustine's entire system of thought. If you're trapped in an internal war and your own willpower is wounded and totally unreliable, what hope do you have? Seriously, how do you win? This is the question that just tormented him for years. If he couldn't conquer his desires through his own strength, and, well, we saw how that went after his breakup, then what was the solution? Was he just doomed to fail over and over again? And here is his breakthrough, his profound answer. Victory doesn't come from just gritting your teeth and trying harder. He concluded that we aren't saved by just following the rules, what he called being under the law. No, instead, we're saved by being under grace, this divine gift that actually reshapes our hearts and makes us want what is good, so we freely choose it. Okay, so now we've got his framework, right? There's a war inside us, our will is wounded, and we desperately need divine grace. So let's bring it all the way back to our original question and see how this stacks up against our modern idea of addiction. And this chart really shows where the language sounds similar, but the concepts are actually worlds apart. For Augustine, this slavery starts with a spiritual problem, pride. But the modern clinical view sees addiction coming from this complex mix of genetics, environment, social factors. Augustine sees our will as wounded, sure, but still morally responsible. The clinical view sees our freedom as seriously impaired. And of course, the remedies are different. For Augustine, the fix is purely spiritual, divine grace. For modern addiction, the remedy has to be holistic, medical, social, and yeah, often spiritual support too.
Building on Augustine's legacy, modern Catholic thought makes a really important distinction. The condition of addiction is seen as a wound, a sickness. It messes with your freedom and creates a really strong pull towards sin. But the condition itself is not considered the sin. And that perspective calls for mercy and healing, not just condemnation. It recognizes the dignity of the person who's struggling. So let's answer the big question. Was he a sex addict? The simple answer is no. While his raw, honest description of his struggle really resonates with the modern experience of addiction, the label just doesn't quite fit. He was working inside a theological framework of sin and grace, not a clinical one of pathology and therapy. His was a spiritual diagnosis, and for him, it demanded a spiritual cure.
And that really leaves us with a fascinating question for our own lives, doesn't it? I mean, think about it. The words we choose to use really matter. When you face your own internal battles, does calling it a sin, a sickness, a choice, or a struggle change how you deal with it? And maybe more importantly, does it change how you find your own way to freedom?